MicroBrewr Podcast, Session 21.
Welcome to MicroBrewr Podcast, inspiring you as you start your own microbrewery or take your existing brewery to the next level. Here's your host, Nathan Pierce.
Welcome to MicroBrewr Podcast. We talk about everything craft beer related with a focus on people looking at starting their own microbreweries or wanting to take their existing breweries to the next level. I'm your host, Nathan Pierce. This is a weekly podcast interviewing brewers and brewery owners going deep to get inside the industry and inside the heads of people who work there. Please subscribe in iTunes or Stitcher if you like the show so you won't miss any episodes. If you want a link to find MicroBrewr in iTunes, go to microbrewer.com/iTunes, and that'll show you how to get there. In episode 19, when I asked Rich Weber from Sierra Blanca Brewery what beer style will be gaining attention, he said session beers. He was saying as people get older, they tend not to do well with their weight. So he was saying the bigger, heavier beers are going to be tougher for people to keep up with as they age. And I came across an article that says exactly that, 24 light beers ranked on deadspin.com. So go to the show notes and check out that article. The website has show notes for the episode with links to recommended books and other resources. And you can find the show notes for episode 19, where I added the link to that article at microbrewer.com/session19. In this episode, I talk with Justin Stang from Seventh Son Brewery in Dunedin, Florida. They spell it differently. It's the number 7, VENTH, and then Sun, SUN. Justin and his partner Devin Krebs opened Seventh Son in January 2012. After studying fermentation science in Oregon State, she brewed at Anheuser-Busch and was then a production manager at Sweetwater Brewing in Atlanta. And that's where Justin met her when he was brewing there. Justin was talking about the explosive growth of craft beer in Florida. And he said the oldest continually operating brewery in Florida is just 17 years old. And that surprised me because here in California, of course, we have Anchor Brewing with their long history in San Francisco. So I looked into the stats a little. California has 381 craft breweries, ranked first in the nation. But that makes sense because we're the most populated state. Florida has 66 craft breweries, not far behind California at 30. They're 13th in the nation. California has 1.4 breweries per capita, which is 19th in the nation, and Florida has 0.5 breweries per capita. It's not doing so hot. 46th in the nation. I got these stats from Brewers Association. They have all kinds of super detailed statistics, more than you can handle. You could go to www.brewersassociation.org and then hover over statistics. Then from the drop-down menu, select state craft beer data. Then you can select any of the 50 states, and they have a little graph for each state too. So I was looking at that a little more closely. They only have numbers from 2011, 2012, and 2013, but they show the number of breweries in those years. And I did the math on my own and found the number of breweries in California went up by 41% in that time period, whereas Florida went up by 46%. It's growing a little bit faster than California. Anyways, you could get lost all day in Brewers Association stats. I get lost there all the time. I just wanted to clarify that a little bit about the discussion that's coming up. So here's the interview. Enjoy. Okay, Justin, I introduce you to the listeners. Let's take a few minutes, and you could tell us more about you and your brewery.
Sure. So I started in the brewing industry. I've been doing this now for about 8 years, and opened Seventh Son with my partner, who has even more experience than that. Went to school for fermentation science. Seventh Son's been open for 2.5 years now, and we've doubled in size since we opened, which, starting very small, doesn't really seem like a lot, but we're pretty proud of our growth. And we're in Dunedin, Florida.
Where's Dunedin?
We're in the Tampa Bay area, just north of Clearwater on the Gulf side of the bay.
So you're like one city within a larger metropolitan area?
That's correct. Yeah, Dunedin's actually a pretty small community, but very rich in beer culture.
Yeah, how's that?
The oldest craft brewery in Florida is here and still in operation, the Dunedin Brewery. I believe they just celebrated their 17th or 18th anniversary, and they are the oldest continually operating craft brewery in the state. And the small size of our town, everyone's very familiar with craft beer and has been for a long time because of that. And we also have a couple multi-tap houses that carry all craft. When we moved the Seventh Son in, we were welcomed with pretty seasoned craft beer drinkers, which made things really. It was an easy transition for everyone, so to speak.
How's the craft brew scene now? Is there a lot of breweries there now?
There's two more opening in Dunedin. Actually, one just opened less than a month ago. Really small, 2-barrel system. They're doing batches just for their tasting room / tap room there. Overall, in the Tampa Bay area, it's growing faster than I can keep track of. And in Florida now, I think we're a little bit over 100 breweries statewide. So things are taking off pretty quick. There's a lot of anticipation for new breweries opening. Feels like every month.
Well, if the numbers aren't exactly there yet, this sounds like the growth is super, super steep. When you said that the oldest brewery is only 17 years old, I expected you to say something much older. Because maybe California is an exception because we have Anchor Brewing, which has been around a long, long time. So if there's been more than you could keep up with just in the last 17 years, things must be growing at a phenomenal pace.
Yeah. Back when we first got started, I would say there was about 40 breweries in the state, and it was really easy to keep track of what everybody was doing because it was a pretty small, tight-knit community. And it's not uncommon now for me to hear of a brewery that's opened and I have no idea who it is. It's all new to me. And just the other day, I received an email from one that was closing that I had never even heard of and knew was open yet. But it's a big state. Our laws here weren't necessarily conducive to craft brewing in the earlier days. Back in the 90s, there was some bottle restriction sizes and the tasting, not being able to have a tasting room where you could sell beer out of or beer to go made things really hard for those first breweries. So most of them were just brew pubs. To actually have a real production craft brewery was really hard then, and a lot of them closed or sold their brands to contract breweries from the 90s. The ones that are still around, proving the test of time.
What do you think's driving all this growth in Florida?
Right now, the local thing is pretty big, and the majority of the breweries that are opening are relatively small, and they're focused on taproom sales. Not to say that there is a good bit of production breweries out there that are popping up too, but Florida's been pretty wide open. I think it's kind of one of the best kept secrets in the craft industry. I mean, it's a big state, and people take a lot of pride in local here as far as our year-round residents. Of course, we have a lot of tourism too, and where the tourists originate, they're familiar with craft beer, and they're seeking out craft beer when they're on vacation to see what Florida has to offer. So, right now, most of the breweries in the state don't have a problem running at full capacity. I mean, pretty much none of us seems like can make enough beer right now.
Maybe on a side note, I've wondered about that. When I was planning to start my brewery through the past year, putting together the business plan and whatnot, lots of people are telling me, not necessarily people who know about the beer industry, but just friends and family, other people giving me advice to start slow and grow from there. But like time after time, I see breweries who just the demand is way more than what they expected, and they're already expanding like in the first year.
Yeah, that does seem to be a fairly reoccurring theme. When we opened Seventh Son, we were confident that we would open up at 100% capacity, just because of the small size of it. But that actually made planning, as far as our business plan, pretty safe. We felt like we were minimizing our risk by knowing exactly what we could do, and it was easy to build around that. I think my advice there is to just grow smart. Grow your brand the right way. That way you don't wind up overextending yourself to where you have to sell beer to pay the bills in areas where they might not be ready for your beer, or where you haven't, set up a following yet, or you know what I mean? Like, so the organic growth seems to be a lot more solid to me than having to roll out new territories when you're not necessarily ready to do that.
Well, one brewery that I tried to contact for this podcast to be a guest on the podcast, they actually told me that they were not doing any media outreach right now, and they wouldn't do an interview because they're having trouble just meeting their demand right now, and they don't want to push themselves. They don't want to promote themselves anymore until that they can expand their production facility.
I can relate to that. Actually, we've cut back our media a lot. We decided recently we're not going to be advertising our releases anymore. We're going to let that information spread organically as the crowds that come for our beer exceed what we can actually accommodate.
Oh my gosh.
And that's a great thing. I always say be careful what you wish for, you might get it. The downside to having those crowds is some people are going to have a bad experience when they don't get the beer that they were really anticipating getting. Also, it makes it really hard on our staff, and we have to manage crowds that our building just isn't set up to do, and then traffic becomes a problem and parking. And yeah, so I can definitely relate to that. There is a point in time where you kind of got to slow that down if things go according to plan.
Are you going to have a Pliny the Younger on your hands pretty soon? Have you heard about that in California? People waiting like 8 hours for a pint of beer?
Yeah, I have. And I think Russian River does a really good job with dealing with that. And I think they've been around long enough where some people, they expect that. I honestly, I'd go stand in line for a beer with my buddies like that. Just sounds like fun. Cool way to spend the day, share beers, and I don't know. But I'm kind of a beer nerd on the side. I like going to the high-profile beer releases and things. Cigar City has some of those.
Just bring sunblock, huh?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and a cooler.
Okay, thanks for broadening the picture. Now let's focus it a little bit. But first, frame the discussion. Tell us if Seventh Son has core values or core words or operating principles that you work by.
Yeah, we do actually. When it comes to our beer, we do have some beer out to distribution. Actually, more than half of our production goes out the door right now. So our main commitment is to consistency of the beer, and that's something that Devin obviously developed through her career and her education. Anheuser-Busch being probably the most consistent brewery out there. She got a lot of training there, and I was fortunate enough to learn through her and a brewmaster that took the quality assurance very, very seriously. So we've instilled that in our staff. We also like to promote creativity. We do have the ability to do small batches here. So, we're creativity not just in ingredients, but maybe in fermentation regimens or yeast blending in barrels, the use of fruit. Just anything that keeps not only our audience and our consumers involved in what we're doing, but also keeps our staff feeling creative and feeling like they contribute to what the Seventh Son is as a family. That's really important to us here.
Okay, Justin, I like to go real deep, real fast. I hope you're okay with that.
Yeah, man, no problem. Yep.
Tell us the biggest mistake you ever made as a brewery owner.
The biggest mistake? That's a tough one. I mean, not to say that we've made a handful of mistakes, in extending ourselves too far, and some like wild bacteria and things where we've had to dump beer. But I always kind of take that as a learning experience as well.
You're kind of young as a brewery.
Yes, we are. Yeah, I mean, it's small, and there was about 2.5 years worth of planning that went into it. I guess the biggest mistake is when we first started out, we underestimated how much it was going to cost and how long it was going to take. I don't know if that really qualifies for a mistake, but we really thought that we had that dialed in, and that was something that we definitely misjudged.
Yeah, I see in this article that Joe Shellerow did, 61 Brewers Speak Out. Devin sent in a contribution to that. She said that all the other seasoned veterans in the industry that you guys talked to said that you should plan for everything to take twice as long and cost 3 times as much. And she said it took even twice as long as that, I think.
Yeah, and part of that was on us. We thought it was going to be a little bit easier to go out and raise capital to start a larger facility. I mean, initially we wanted to build a facility that would start out with a 10,000 barrel annual production, and we could max it out at 3 times that. Our experience was from larger breweries, and at that time, when we sought out to do that, the financial situation as far as the banks was about as poor as it could be. So traditional lending was out the door. And being a pretty new concept as far as craft breweries go in the Southeast and Florida specifically, to seek out private equity was just as difficult. We spent all our time educating, and trying to find a good match with a private equity that wasn't going to take over our business to where we'd be just working for somebody else again. So that's what ate up a lot of our time as far as that's concerned. And then it all the time that we spent on that before we decided to revise our plan and go with something smaller that we could finance on our own, that ate up a lot of that. Even longer, I think, is what she's referring to there.
The website says you have a 4.5 barrel system. Do you still have that?
It's actually 3.5. Yeah, 3.5. We produce 3.5 barrels of finished wort every batch.
So what's your annual capacity on that?
Our actual brewing space on site here is about 500 square feet, and we're getting close to 1,000 barrels annually now. That's as far as we can push it. We've added a wood cellar that's helped increase our fermentation capacity, but as far as our footprint, we're maxed out at that.
If you could start your brewery again, what would you do differently to do it better?
If I had it all to do over again, I probably would have hired some brewers to come in and start working with us before I did. I did all the brewing for a long time, and I think the biggest mistake that I did there is just I think I could have been more productive in the business if I had hired someone sooner and had them on board, trained and ready to go to take care of that aspect of the business. I would probably do that sooner.
Okay, I know you're a young brewery, but let's go to the other side. I know you've got the best idea you ever had for your brewery.
I think the best thing that we did was decide to go small, honestly, right off the bat. We were able to get open at a really critical time here, right before the big wave of breweries hit. So there was a lot in planning, a lot that were under construction, a lot of anticipation for new breweries outside of Cigar City, which they pretty much paved the way for as far as the media buzz goes. So when we first opened up, we had a huge blowout event that got media coverage from all the local news channels, with a lot of publicity from that, and I think that was cool. We auctioned off our first pour of our beer for charity. I think it sold for $203.
For 1 pint?
For 1 pint.
Nice. That's actually a pretty fun idea. Which charity did the money go to?
It went to the Homeless Emergency Project in our county over here in Pinellas County. Just
imagine if it would have been a pitcher. How much would that have gone for?
Well, we actually split it up into 3 pours. The owner, the vice president, and the owner, and another fan of Seventh Son. Cigar City. They all came over and they split the bid. I think it was auctioned off on eBay.
Oh, okay. So you did the auction on eBay ahead of time. So you didn't have like the guy, hey, babe, give me a bid here.
No, we had it ahead of time so that it could build up more anticipation, and then we were able to get that out to the local media. So of course, our tasting room was full of news cameras watching us pour like the most expensive beer that's been poured in Pinellas County.
Oh wow, that's an awesome idea.
Yeah, it was really fun.
Has there been a moment when you realized that you finally succeeded?
Yeah. I think that day was it. You know, when we had a crowd of like 500 people here. I mean, I felt like day one we were on the way to success. The amount of positive feedback we got was amazing, and it feels good when you finally pour your first beer that you brewed in your own brewery. Like that's just a feeling of success in its own.
Well, I have a feeling I know what the answer to the next question is going to be. I always ask, what's your favorite memory since opening the brewery?
My favorite memory?
Sounds like it's going to be that first day also.
Huh. You know, I was pretty proud when we got our beer out into distribution, to be honest. That was definitely a very emotional day when we got the brewery open, but when I saw my beer being poured out in other accounts for the first time, that was really cool, because then I felt like I was amongst my peers now, you know, and the other friends that I have that own breweries and even the national brands too. You really feel like you're part of the club then.
Nice.
Mm-hmm.
So what could you tell an aspiring home brewer? What's the most important thing for someone starting a brewery that they can start doing tomorrow?
You know, I would reach out to whatever brewery in your area is that you feel like is successful and that you want to use as a role model. And I would try to get my foot in the door and do whatever I could to meet people and start working there and gaining experience. You know, what you learn in a production brewery is huge and not necessarily applicable to home brewing. I feel like my best advice, my best analogy there is, you know, I'm not a great cook or anything, but if you're a great cook and you can make a great steak at home for you and your friends, translating that into a restaurant that seats 1,000 people, you know, those are two different skill sets there. Not to say that they're not related and they don't require the same amount of mastery of you know, cooking and or brewing, but the way a plant runs and the way a business runs and operating as a new entrepreneur, those skills can be learned, I think, by being close to a brewery.
Got to get experience.
I think that's the most important thing you can do is gain experience on a professional level prior to entering opening your own brewery. Not to say that it can't be done, but that's just my best advice.
Well, now we have a question from one of our listeners, John Tiffany, who asks, what do you feel are the most important aspects of your brewing, and how do you approach improving on that?
Well, as we are with quality and consistency, we do double batches. So we'll brew 2 batches into one fermenter. And one of the advantages of doing that is if we miss gravity or if one thing just isn't quite right on the first batch, we can compensate for that on the second batch. We can also, if one tank didn't quite finish where we wanted it to, or finish at a higher gravity or lower gravity, we can blend that with another batch in our bright tanks to maintain consistency there. Fermentation is huge for us. You know, we have a glycol chiller. Obviously, we have conical fermenters, and we monitor our temperatures, and we take gravities daily to monitor the degree of fermentation. We don't have a lab, so with that information, we can find out what we feel like is the most viable yeast to continue on throughout the brewery. So basically, the majority of what we put into is either through fermentation or through packaging. We have a very serious keg cleaning regiment that is just slightly overkill, but our packaged beer is it's the last time we can control the quality of it. So we put a lot of effort into making sure that all our packaging equipment is up to snuff and all the kegs are extra clean.
Yeah, Rich Weber from Sierra Blanca Brewery on episode 19, he said that he got advice from somebody else one time that said you can't improve the beer. You can only keep it the same or hurt it. So your goal is just to keep it the same when you're putting it into packaging.
Yeah, exactly. I want everybody's experience to be just like it was the first time they had it. You know, that one, if you let that one batch slide out, or you let that one keg slide, that could be pretty damaging to your relationship with the consumer.
You mentioned earlier that consistency and creativity is a main focus. So I want to ask you about some of your beers. You have a creamsicle wheat. You have like a hoppy saison and a sour saison, and you have a Belgian dark that you make with cherries.
Yeah, so the only one of those that we would classify as a core brand would be the creamsicle wheat beer. We call it Graffiti Orange, and that one makes up about 40% of our production, and it's the one that we sell the most to distribution as well. The other beers, the saison, I'm not quite sure where those were pulled out from, but those beers have been on recently.
Oh, I just got them off your website.
Gotcha. The other three are those are, for lack of a better term, like a one-off batch, and what we keep in the tasting room here is more along that style. We do offer all our core brands here, but the one-off beers that we do a single batch of, we keep in the tasting room. They don't really hit distribution.
Okay, now it's time for happy hour. The next set of questions are a little lighter. It's going to help us get to know each other a little better, have some fun, and get inside the industry.
Cool.
Are you ready, Justin?
Yeah, yep.
Cans or bottles?
Cans in Florida. We've got a lot of outdoor activities where bottles are restricted, you know, whether it be by the pool, on a boat, on the golf course. Cans are huge in Florida right now.
What's the most challenging beer you've ever made?
The most challenging beer that we've ever made was when we got into using lactobacillus and doing lactic fermentation. That was a process that took us quite a while to master. At the time we were doing it, no one in Florida on a commercial level was available to reach out to. I don't think anyone was really doing it when we started it. So we just kind of went by the advice of homebrewers, got on the forums, saw what people were doing, and after about 4 failed attempts, we finally got it, and we got on a regimen that worked very well for us for a long time. We've since refined the way that we do it to further ensure consistency of our Berliner Weiss. But that was a big challenge, and it was expensive too.
If you were going to make a 5-gallon batch at home this weekend, what would you make?
I would make as close to a clone of Duvel as I could and bottle condition it.
Tell me one beer style that you think will be gaining more attention.
For our region, I think the Berliner Weiss is going to become more popular. Some breweries have already coined the term Florida Weiss here to try and, you know, represent the regional twist on it by using a lot of local fruit in the Berliner Weiss style. But I see that catching on a lot now. There's an all Berliner Weiss festival that occurs in the area, and I've seen them, you know, on draft at the outside of the breweries now. They're actually hitting distribution. We canned one last year just to kind of satisfy the first brewery that ever canned one down here in Florida.
Really? You guys are ahead of the curve.
It was more kind of a friendly bet that we had between a few breweries as to who could get that accomplished first. So we did a batch of Berliner Weiss, and we hired a mobile canning line. We don't actually have a footprint for a package line here, but it was a fun competition.
I went and checked out a winery earlier this year, and I saw, while I was actually driving past another winery, I saw them with a mobile bottling unit. And that was the first time I ever heard of mobile bottling or mobile canning units like that could just pull up to small operations like yours.
Yeah, and they're not only good for the small operations, but with some of the larger breweries around here, they've experienced difficulties when a piece of machinery on their packaging line breaks and they can't get replacement parts for a week or two. And when that happens, they can call in the mobile canner and they can keep going without having to skip a beat. I think it's more useful to those guys than the small guys, really, because there's a lot more on the line there when they can't package.
Can you get them on pretty short notice?
I have a feeling if you're a larger brewery and you're doing a lot bigger volume, that you probably get a little better attention.
Right. Is there a lot of those businesses around to choose from?
There's only one mobile canner that I know of, and he covers the whole state of Florida.
Oh my gosh,
that's a long drive from the Panhandle to Key West. That's probably like a 12-hour drive. So he covers a lot of ground.
How long did you have to schedule that ahead of time?
Because of the size of what we were doing, I had to schedule it like probably over a month in advance. And I had to be pretty flexible with his schedule too.
Yeah, he wanted to do it when he was already sort of in the area.
Yeah, or he wasn't really like trying to go out of his way, so we had to kind of catch him on his way through real quick. But it wasn't a big deal. We actually pulled the beer out of the bright tank. We kegged it so that we could continue using that tank without tying it up. And then when he came in, we were able to just hook up the half barrels. It wasn't the most efficient way to do it by any means, but like I said, it was just kind of done as a friendly bet, and I thought it was really cool to have a canned brewing device.
Super cool. And maybe next time you can coordinate your timing with the other Dunedin breweries to all have a Florida Vice ready when the mobile canning line is around, and then you'll have like a Dunedin Vice.
That'd be awesome.
Dunedin Vice Festival.
Yeah.
Can you suggest a book for our audience that will help them succeed in opening a brewery?
I just finished Ken Grossman's book, and I thought that was pretty insightful. I know not many of us are going to have our eyes set on a Sierra Nevada-sized brewery, but I think a lot of his experiences that he shared in that book I could relate to, about your relationships that you build in the beginning and how important those are going to be as your business grows, especially when looking at exit strategies for your initial investors or partners. There's always a point in time where somebody's going to want to part ways, and I think the earlier you set up a plan for that, the better off you'll be. And he talks a lot about that in there, and he talks a lot about just the challenges of getting your product out there, and some of the high points where you get to enjoy the fruits of your labor.
Beyond the Pale, the story of Sierra Nevada Brewing Company.
That's the one. Yep. Sorry, I couldn't recall the title right off the top of my head there.
No problem. I looked it up on Amazon.
It's a great book.
Give us one last piece of advice for someone who just brewed the first batch at their new brewery, and then we'll close up the brew house for the night.
Well, make sure the tank's set to the right temperature. I think take good notes on that batch, really good notes, and try and get as most honest feedback as you can about it, and compare that feedback to your notes. And the next batch you do, whatever you need to tweak, I think note keeping is the biggest thing you can do, and that starts with the very first batch of beer that you brew. You set that precedent early and maintain it through your brewery. I think you'll be able to navigate any problems that you have in the future much easier.
Justin, thanks for sharing your story. It's been cool talking with you, and thanks for sharing your tips on starting and operating a successful brewery. So thanks for having me. Tell us how we can stay in touch with you, and then we'll set this episode aside to ferment.
I actually check our Facebook every day. I do my best to respond to Facebook messages and questions. all the way from questions about bottle releases to questions about how we're brewing our beer or technical blending. I'm on top of that. That's a great way to keep in touch or bounce any ideas or questions off of us.
Thanks again, Justin Stang, for being on MicroBrewr Podcast. I really appreciate you taking the time and sharing your advice. And listeners, thank you too. There were a few comments on the website this week. Some comments in the show notes for past episodes and on other blogs. Rick and Gary Marshall both left comments with their preference on the length of the podcast. Actually, Rick said he likes an hour and Gary likes about half an hour. But for both of them, it was kind of like, if it's informative and entertaining, up to 60 minutes is good. So we'll keep doing what we've been doing as far as length of time for the podcasts. And Orlando left comments on episode 19 saying he likes the interview questions. Sweet. Thanks a lot, you guys, for letting me know what you think. That really helps. I really appreciate it. Seriously, it's really cool to know that people really are listening. I see the download numbers, but interaction is a lot more fun. It's really good feedback. And as always, the show notes for this episode are at microbrewer.com/session21. So check it out for links to the book recommendation and other resources and links to Seventh Son Brewery. Go to the show notes, check out Seventh Son, and thank Justin for being on the show. It's at microbrewer.com/session21. Remember, if you like the show, please subscribe in iTunes or Stitcher. It sends every episode directly to you as soon as it comes out. So if you want a link to find it on iTunes, go to microbrewer.com/iTunes. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, support your local brewery, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks for listening to MicroBrewr Podcast with Nathan Pierce. We'll see you right here next time at microbrewer.com.
If you want more resources for starting a craft brewery, check out microbrewer.com, microbrewer.com. If you want to become a Cicerone certified beer server, check out beerexamschool.com for free study guide and flashcards for the certified beer server exam. beerexamschool.com.